Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Dr. Salih al Fawzan's book about Aqida Tawhid, the Creed of Monotheism. This section is 2.2, section 6. And what I really liked about it is provides lots of ayats for us, aka verses. And he explains things in a way that are very comprehensive. So let us continue. This is about explanation of the pillars of true worship. Go ahead and listen to this as you're driving, washing dishes, hanging out with the babies, whatever you're doing. Bismillah. Worship rests upon three pillars. These are love, fear, and hope. Love must be accompanied by submissiveness, and fear by hope. These things must be present. Allah, while describing his believing slaves, said, quote, "Whom he will love and they will love him." Quran 5:54. Ibadah, love. He also said, quote, "But those who believe love Allah more than anything else." Quran 2:165. He also said, while describing his messengers and prophets, quote, "Verily, they used to hasten on to do good deeds, and they used to call on us with hope and fear, and used to humble themselves before us." Quran 21:90. So, right here, we see love mentioned, and we see hope and fear. So he mentioned love, hope, and fear as three pillars of worship, true worship. So you cannot just fear or just hope or just love. It's a combination of all three, and his evidence of that is directly from the Quran. One of the Salaf said, quote, "Whoever worships Allah with love alone is a heretic. Whoever worships him with hope alone is a murjiya. And a murjiya is a member of a deviant sect who believes that faith neither increases nor decreases, and that being a Muslim renders one immune from Allah's punishment regardless of one's sins, so they do not fear Allah's punishment." So you don't want to be a murjiya. Also, whoever worships him with fear alone is one of the Hawarij. However, the one who worships Allah with love, fear, and hope is a true believer and monotheist. See, I remember Asim al-Hakim saying this as well. And I remembered this in my mind. Because when people say, like, God is love, that you can't fear God, you just have to be like, I love, it's like a hippie, new age. I hear, I live in the Bay Area in California, so I hear this crap a lot. Love is love. And you're like, eh. And then sometimes when I read the old Catholic text, there's fire and brimstone and the pits of hell, and I like it. But there's also the despair people who are like, you must have hope. And you're like, yeah, So when I hear this Shaykh say, it's a combination of all three, and he lists ayats from the Quran, I'm like, that's it. That makes sense. And then you examine the relationship between hope, love, and fear. Okay? Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, has mentioned this in his treatise al-Ubudiyya. He also said, quote, "The religion of Allah is worship, obedience, and humility to Him alone. The etymological meaning of ibadah worship is submission. A path is said to be mu'abad if it has been prepared and severely stepped on. However, the worship which is enjoined involves the meaning of humility and the meaning of love. Therefore, it encompasses perfect humility to Allah the Most High and perfect love for Him. One who humbles himself to a person, though he hates him, is not a slave to him. Also, if he loves something, but is not subservient to it, he is not a slave to it. This is similar to the love a man has for his children and his friends. Therefore, Either of the two does not suffice in the worship of Allah, the Most High. Rather, it is mandatory that Allah is more beloved to a slave than everything else, and greater than every other thing to him. In fact, none deserves perfect love and humility but Allah. So, notice how the religion of Allah is worship. We worship Tawhid. We worship none but Allah. And then you look at what's an act of worship, right? How do you maintain your worship? How do you avoid shirk? Okay? And him mentioning obedience and humility, and that ibadah worship is submission, solidifies us for it. This is highly important because we have to discover what the rules are, right? Fact check people who may be telling us like this is permissible or this is not. We want to do our best and avoid bid'ah and do our due diligence, as they say, because we're here to worship Allah alone. That's why we were created, and the way we get closer to Allah is through worship. And so we have to recall how he mentioned hope, love, and fear. Those are the pillars of worship. Keeping those in balance, working on those, help us to become better, inshallah. He continues. So we're talking about, the Sheikh's talking now, no more talking about Taymiyyah. These are the pillars upon which worship revolves. Ibn al-Qayyim said in Al-Nunniyah, quote, "The worship of the gracious Lord is perfect love and humility of the slave. These are its two axes, and upon them the orbit of worship revolves. It revolved not until the two axes were established. Its steering is by command, the command of his messenger, peace be upon him, not by whims, desires, and the devil." Okay. Notice here, not by whims, desires, and the devil. Command of the messenger, peace be upon him. So, we're worshipping Allah with perfect love and humility. We do that, it'll help us get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When people are saying don't get married or to disobey Allah's commands because they have a desire or a whim or they're being led by the devil, we have to remember we have to have obedience. We have to submit to Allah. We have to learn what's permissible, what's the parameters, okay? And we have to do it and hope in Allah's reward, okay? And we do it for the sake of Allah. This takes time for all of us to learn. We work on it. But once we know, there's no arguing with it, right? We have to acknowledge it and work towards that. Very important. Okay. Ooh, the next section is on Tawhid al-Asma wa Sifat, oneness in his name and attributes. That one was a cool section because I read ahead in that one. But this was the petite one, section 6.2. So we're just going to go over it again. When someone asks us, what are the pillars of true worship? We need to say love, fear, and hope. And then, again, the strongest ayats here he put for us, Quran 5:54, Quran 2:165, and Quran 21:90. What's important with looking at the Quran and Sunnah for evidence of what we're supposed to do in Islam is that we see it directly from the text. This is something that differentiates us from modernists who will add things that you can't find support for. So we see there is support for having all three. And remember, fearing Allah doesn't mean you can't love Him, because that sets boundaries. If Allah was only love, people would disobey willy-nilly. They would take for granted mercy, right? Because if you know that Allah is the most merciful, but that He can literally have you return to Him in an instant, as in die, right? you can't be haughty and arrogant and boastful and worship your own mind and think you're going to be some transhumanist computer thing, live forever and whatnot, life extension technology, and you'll never be held accountable. No. We hope we do our best, right? We have hope in His mercy, but we then don't say, oh, well, God is love, so I'm gonna get to go around and do whatever I want and just forgive me. No. But if you're only in fear and terrified, you haven't appreciated the mercy and the beauty and the wonder of life, I'd argue. And hope is important so that you don't wallow in despair and begin to hate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then turn to the black magic groups, because that happens quite a lot. Women go through a terrible relationship, they get cheated on, he runs off with a whore, and then they're like, I'm going to make sure the next guy is totally under my control. They turn to black magic. A lot of women do that because they lose hope in their purpose in life, right? It's very sad. So if we have hope that, okay, Allah allowed this suffering to touch me, I'm going to hope that everything's going to be okay, and we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward us for all our suffering. So even if you got cheated on, or you're in an unhappy marriage, if you still do good, your reward is good, because good is the reward for good. Okay? You don't get to do something bad and sinful because a sin happened to you. If your marriage failed, you did everything you could, in the akhirah, in the hereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward you for enduring that and not doing something evil in response, right? Think of the example. Okay, so Cersei Lannister beheaded Missandei, Daenerys' right-hand person, right? She had a special bond with her. Daenerys goes mad, that tips the scale, she burns down King's Landing, feels it's justified. And if you look at, okay, so one person you loved got beheaded, and then you torched an entire city because of what one person did something to you. That's not a proper response to your suffering. You see, so even if you get hurt, you don't get to do the retribution of transgressing the limits, right? It's hard to have gracious patience. Sometimes you can do a response, but it doesn't have to be so over the line. Finding and striking that balance is another thing. It's very, very intelligent, this section. And it's good when I read something and then I realize I've heard this from another sheikh. So remember, no innovations, no deviations. And then he mentioned Ibn al-Qayyim, and then Sheikh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. And he mentioned the Hawarij. This is a word I hear a lot. Okay? So, educational. If you'd like to join my blog, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.